When an art appraiser, like, spots a fake painting, they don't really just guess. They put a fleck of paint under a microscope, find a chemical like titanium white that wasn't even invented until 1921 or something, and they just say, there it is, it's a fake.
Right, it's binary. The chemistry doesn't lie.
Exactly.
Right.
But if you step into the world of scientific publishing today, that chemistry is just entirely broken. So for today's deep dive, we are looking at how world-class editors at journals like Nature and Elsevier are basically completely rebuilding their defenses in real time.
Yeah, they have to. They're facing this unprecedented flood of AI ghostwriters.
And the internal editorial protocols we're looking at today, guidelines from Elsevier, Nature, and COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics, their new playbook is just fascinating.
It's a complete paradigm shift, really, in how we verify human knowledge, because for decades, peer review just kind of assumed that if the data looked plausible and the reasoning was sound, well, a human being did the work.
Right, obviously.
But that baseline assumption is totally gone now. And this deep dive into these internal protocols shows an industry realizing that, the old diagnostic tools are just dangerously obsolete.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the obvious first instinct for most of you listening is probably a technological one. Like, if software is writing the papers, just use software to catch it, right?
Exactly. Just fight fire with fire.
Yeah. Run every submission through an AI detector tools like GPT-0 or Turnitin and just auto-reject the high scores. But to me, AI detectors are basically the modern equivalent of those old polygraph lie detector tests.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right, because they look incredibly rigorous. They spit out this authoritative-looking percentage on a screen, but they are fundamentally flawed. They just measure the entirely wrong thing.
What's fascinating here is that the publishers are actually aggressively warning against that exact technological instinct. The guidelines from COPE explicitly state that it is not sensible to use a threshold approach for rejection.
So you can't just set a rule saying, like, anything scoring over 30% AI gets tossed.
No, absolutely not. The false positive rates are just catastrophic. I mean, one study in our stack found that free detection tools flagged over 27% of completely legitimate human-written academic text as AI-generated.
Wait, a 27% false positive rate?
Yeah.
So like 1 in 4 legitimate scientists is getting flagged as a machine just for their writing style.
Yeah, and it actually gets worse depending on who is doing the writing. When researchers tested 7 different detectors on essays written by non-native English speakers, all 7 unanimously classified 19% of those human essays as AI-generated.
Unanimously. 19% falsely accused by every single tool.
Every single one.
That is a massive systemic failure. Why does the software get it so wrong? And why specifically target non-native speakers?
Well, it really comes down to the underlying mechanics of the detectors. They don't actually understand the meaning of the text, they just measure statistical patterns.
Right, they're not reading it like a human would.
Exactly. They rely primarily on 2 metrics, perplexity and burstiness. So perplexity is basically a measure of how predictable your word choices are.
Okay, can you give an example of that?
Sure. So if I say, the cat sat on the sign, and you write Matt, that's highly predictable, right? That's low perplexity.
Yeah, makes sense.
But if you write, I don't know, plutonium, that's high perplexity. And these detectors flag low perplexity as a sign of AI.
Because AI is ultimately just a predictive text engine, right? It's just choosing the most statistically likely next word. So it naturally gravitates toward Matt.
Correct. And then the second metric is burstiness, which measures the variation in sentence length and structure. Human thought is naturally pretty chaotic.
Yeah, we write with high burstiness.
Right. We'll drop a short, punchy sentence, and then without warning, we will unleash this massive, meandering, complex paragraph full of em dashes and subordinate clauses, because our brain is just, working through the logic in real time.
Whereas an AI, by contrast, writes with low burstiness, it produces highly uniform, rhythmic, evenly paced sentences.
Exactly. So think about it. If you are a non-native English speaker, you are likely taught to write English using strict, formal grammar rules.
Oh, I see where this is going. You keep your sentences relatively uniform to avoid structural errors.
Right, and you stick to standard vocabulary to ensure clarity. You write methodically and correctly, basically by the textbook.
So your text has low perplexity and low burstiness.
Yes. And because of that discipline, the detector systematically biases against you. It flags your clarity as artificial. Going back to your polygraph analogy, the machine isn't catching the liar. It's catching the nervous, innocent person who is sweating.
Wow. So if the software systematically biases against structural discipline,
Hmm.
editors are basically flying blind. They can't just outsource the policing to an algorithm.
No, they have to treat these detectors strictly as a phase 1 weak signal, nothing more.
But that means human editors are forced to look for the fingerprints themselves. So when a seasoned editor sits down with a manuscript, what exactly does a machine actually sound like?
It sounds like a generic, perfectly symmetrical academic voice that just belongs to no one. Because authentic scientific writing is, it's surprisingly messy.
Messy how?
Well, it contains what editors call disciplinary dialect. Like a material scientist writing about tensile strength uses a fundamentally different cadence and vocabulary than a molecular biologist writing about protein folding.
Wait, so if a manuscript has absolutely flawless, polished grammar with zero typos across the entire document, that actually makes it more suspicious.
Often, yes, it does, because a human author writes the methods section with a completely different cognitive mode than the discussion section.
That makes sense. The methods section is like a dry recipe, but the discussion section is a persuasive argument.
Exactly, there should be a tonal shift. But AI produces this generic, polished tone. It maintains an unnaturally consistent sentence rhythm and vocabulary density from the first page all the way to the last. It's just too smooth.
It's like smoothing out the edges of human thought. I was actually looking at this living lexical watch list they keep in the guidelines, and it's honestly hilarious.
Oh, the watch list is great.
It's just this massive list of hollow intensifiers. Words like robust, cutting edge, comprehensive, meticulous, they are just everywhere.
Yeah, those are classic red flags.
Or these cliche transitional phrases like in the realm of shed light on.
Hmm.
This study aims to bridge the gap. It reads like every generic high school valedictorian speech ever given. It's like the AI is trying to hype up a really boring party.
And that hyping behavior is actually a direct byproduct of how these models are trained. We have to look at RLHF reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Right, the human training phase.
Yeah, companies like OpenAI and Anthropic train their models to be maximally helpful, harmless, and polite. So if an AI takes a firm, controversial stance on a nuanced scientific debate, it risks being graded as wrong or unhelpful by the human evaluators.
Ah, so it learns to dodge the hard stances.
It defaults to hyperneutrality. And in academic writing, this manifests as hedge stacking. Human scientists hedge their claims, sure. They'll say, this suggests rather than this proves.
But an AI takes it way too far.
Way too far. It traps itself in this overly cautious loop to avoid making any definitive claim. You'll see sentences like, it is worth noting that it should be emphasized.
Or you get this bizarre circular reasoning from the sources, like, while some researchers argue X, others suggest Y, therefore a multifaceted approach is necessary to fully comprehend the dynamics.
Exactly. It uses a lot of words to say absolutely nothing.
It's like a politician dodging a debate question. And it props that nothingness up with structural crutches, like the sources mention the overuse of transitional triads, firstly, secondly,
Grace.
finally.
Yes.
Or starting every single paragraph with moreover or furthermore.
Those transitional words are an illusion of logic. The model doesn't understand the underlying physical concepts of the paper, so it just simulates logical flow by pasting structural connectors between statistically related paragraphs.
But the editorial protocols warn that style is just a soft indicator, right? Because a smooth talker isn't necessarily a fraud. I mean, someone might just genuinely love the phrase in the realm of.
Right. Style isn't enough to reject a paper. To build a real case, an editor needs to find where the machine's actual scientific logic breaks down.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because an LLM writing a paper is, it's like a student who didn't actually do the lab experiment, but memorized the textbook.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
The student knows exactly what a lab report should look like, the fonts, the margins, the headings, but they don't know what actually happened in the room on Tuesday.
And that distinction between form and logic is the absolute core of the new editorial playbook. AI can perfectly mimic the form of science, but it fails the logic of science.
So how do editors use that?
Because of the sheer risk of ruining a legitimate academic's career with a false accusation, editors operate on a two-signal rule.
Meaning you need multiple independent red flags before you can even escalate an investigation.
Exactly. A stylistic quirk, like a transitional triad, is just a weak signal. A logic failure is a strong or decisive signal, and the ultimate decisive signal is the hallucination check.
The fake citations. I am still just stunned that a machine can invent a researcher out of thin air.
Oh, it does. It invents realistic-sounding author names, pairs them with completely fake journal titles, and even generates fake digital object identifiers, or DOIs.
That's wild.
And the source material notes that papers containing entirely fabricated citations have actually slipped through the cracks and been accepted at premier conferences like NeurIPS and ICLR.
But why does it even do that? If I ask a regular search engine for a paper on quantum mechanics, it finds a real paper. Why does an LLM just lie?
Because an LLM is not a search engine. It is not querying a database of verified facts. It is generating text token by token.
All right, back to the predictive text thing.
Yeah, so if the preceding text describes a complex biological mechanism, the statistical probability of the next words being a citation format, like a name, a year, and a journal title, is very high.
So it just fills in the blanks.
Right. It generates a statistically plausible name, like Smith, a plausible year, like 2022, and a plausible journal, like Journal of Cellular Dynamics. It looks completely real, but it was basically assembled from statistical dust.
It's terrifyingly plausible. But what happens when the citation is actually real? Because the source material mentions this concept of vibe citing, which sounds like a Gen Z TikTok trend, honestly, but looking at the examples, it's actually really insidious.
Vibe citing is a massive semantic trap. It occurs when an AI links to a real existing paper and the title of that cited paper feels highly relevant to the broad topic.
Okay, so what's the problem?
The problem is, if you actually pull the cited paper and read it, it absolutely does not support the specific granular claim it is attached to in the manuscript.
So it's like citing a baking cookbook as definitive proof that gravity exists just because an apple fell on the counter in chapter 2.
That's hilarious, but yes. The AI recognizes the words apple and falling, matches the semantic vibe of gravity, and just pastes the citation.
The engine is just matching semantic proximity, completely devoid of scientific comprehension.
Exactly. And editors are finding this exact same logic gap in the methods sections, too. The guidelines describe genuine methods as containing hard-won, lab-specific procedural knowledge.
Meaning, like, the messy reality of doing the actual work.
Yes. A human author will specify the quirky equipment models, the supplier of the specific reagents, random software versions, and the troubleshooting decisions they had to make when something just didn't work.
But AI just produces textbook generic procedures.
Right. It describes a broad class of procedure. It will write something like, we use standard optimization techniques to filter the data without ever detailing the actual algorithmic parameters used.
Because it wasn't in the lab. It doesn't know the centrifuge was rattling or that the sample had to be kept at a weird temperature because the fridge was broken.
Exactly. And that total disconnect from reality shows up in the data analysis, too. The sources call it the data interpretation gap.
How does that play out?
Well, if you think about the imperative of a language model, its goal is to provide a satisfying, coherent, complete narrative. But human science rarely provides a clean story.
Yeah, human scientists have to acknowledge statistical noise, strange anomalies, unexpected findings.
But when an AI drafts the results or discussion section, it almost always overinterprets the results toward a perfectly clean, positive narrative.
It acts like an overeager PR rep for the raw data, like everything is robust and cutting edge. Even though the actual table provided in the paper shows a tiny sample size of 10 and totally inconclusive results.
The AI is summarizing what an experiment of this type typically shows in the broader literature, rather than engaging with the specific granular numbers sitting right in front of it in the data table.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the editor's shoes. You've run the gauntlet. You have a manuscript. It's got the transitional triads. It's talking about things in the realm of the methods are textbook generic, and you've spotted a glaring vibe site.
So the two-signal rule is met.
Right. You have a strong case. How do you actually corner a ghostwriter? Wait, asking for raw data files and lab notebooks as due process sounds like a complete administrative nightmare. Are peer reviewers really going to sift through gigabytes of raw data just because a paper used the phrase in the realm of?
They won't, and they really don't have to. The publisher guidelines are very clear on where the burden of proof lies here. This brings us to the most critical ethical pivot in the entire source stack.
Which is?
The core editorial principle isn't about proving text origin. It is not the editor's job to mathematically prove a machine typed the words.
Oh, so what is their job?
The editor's job is to verify scholarly ownership.
Meaning the AI itself isn't the primary violation here.
Right. The violation is unaccountable, unverified scholarly output. An author submitting a paper is claiming intellectual ownership of the ideas and the logic. If they can't defend that logic, the paper is rejected.
So the editor doesn't just send an email saying, "Did ChatGPT write this?"
No, never. They use a forensic tool called the specificity query.
Okay, let's play this out. Pretend I'm the suspect scientist, and you're the editor at Nature. You've flagged my paper. What do you send me?
I send a formal, highly targeted query about the logic of the paper. I might ask, in Section 3, Paragraph 2, you make a significant logical leap from the spectral data to this specific chemical conclusion. Could you elaborate on why you chose not to use the alternative baseline correction method given the constraints of your stated equipment?
Oh, wow. That's a trap.
It absolutely is.
Because if I am a genuine author who just happens to write with a generic polished style, or maybe I just use AI to clean up my English grammar, I can easily answer that.
Right.
I can explain the why behind my own work. I'd say, well, we didn't use the alternative baseline because our spectrometer doesn't support it.
But if you relied on an AI to generate the substance of that paragraph, if the AI hallucinated the leap to sound authoritative, you are entirely cornered.
Yeah, I'd have nothing to say.
You cannot explain the underlying logic of the machine's synthesis because you didn't make the leap, the machine made it, and you just clicked copy-paste.
And what if I try to bluff my way through the answer? What happens then?
That is when the demand for receipts kicks in. Due process requires editors to ask for raw data files, lab notebooks, or version histories of the document.
Basically proving you did the work.
Yeah. A paper that appears fully formed in a single draft with no iterative changes from an author who cannot explain their own methodology is highly suspicious. If the author cannot produce verifiable materials or refuses to engage with the specificity query, the paper is rejected based on a failure of scientific accountability.
So it's not an algorithmic suspicion at that point. You're rejecting them because they can't do the science.
Exactly.
It's brilliant. It bypasses the false positive problem entirely. And looking at the publisher policies, they seem to heavily prioritize transparency over punishment.
They absolutely do. I mean, the guidelines reflect an understanding that AI is now just a permanent part of the scientific workflow. If a researcher uses an LLM just for language polishing, grammar correction, or formatting citations, and they disclose that use, it is generally acceptable and even encouraged in some cases.
But if large substantive sections, like the literature review, the introduction, or the actual data analysis, were generated without the author's direct intellectual effort, that's academic misconduct.
Yes. The ultimate rule is unbending. The human author remains 100% legally and ethically responsible for every single word in the manuscript.
So saying the AI hallucinated that citation is never a valid defense.
Never. That is why major journals are now making structured generative AI declarations mandatory upon submission.
What do those look like?
Authors must explicitly list the tool, the version, the specific sections it was applied to, and sign a confirmation of human verification.
And if you don't disclose it, the failure to disclose is treated as a clear-cut ethical violation, regardless of how harmless the tool's use might have been.
Right. We are moving from evaluating just the final text on the page to evaluating the provenance of the ideas themselves. It's really an investigation of accountability.
So bringing this all together for you listening, catching an AI ghostwriter isn't about looking for a percentage score on a software detector. It is a multi-layered forensic investigation into human accountability.
Exactly.
It starts with spotting the soft stylistic signals, right? The generic polish, the hollow intensifiers, the overhedging caused by safety training.
Yes, and then editors look for the hard logic failures, the hallucinated DOIs, the vibe citing, the textbook generic methods.
And it concludes with the specificity query, testing the author's ability to actually defend their own work.
The signs of absent human effort are surprisingly universal once you know how to look for them.
And what's wild is that these protocols aren't just for scientific journals. Think about it. These exact same red flags of AI, the generic polish, the lack of granular specificity, the vibe citing, they apply to the market research reports, the news articles, and the long corporate emails you read every single day.
Oh, absolutely. The playbook works everywhere. The underlying mechanics of the language models are exactly the same, whether they are writing a paper on quantum physics or just a quarterly marketing update.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder. Everything we've discussed today relies on the fact that current AI is flawed.
Right.
Right now, editors can catch AI because it acts like a predictive text engine. It hallucinates fake citations, it lacks deep logical consistency, and it writes with generic, low-burstiness prose.
For now, yes.
But what happens in 3, 4, or 5 years when the models don't make those mistakes anymore? If a future AI can generate a perfectly reasoned, highly specific, novel scientific method with flawless data consistency, and the human researcher just clicks approve,
Hmm.
what does it actually mean to be an author of human knowledge anymore?
That is the existential question for the future of science.
Going back to our painting forgery at the beginning, the chemical test for titanium white won't matter at all if the machine eventually learns how to paint the actual soul of the artwork. Until then, keep looking for the vibe sites.